and welcome, Astrid. Thank you so much for joining us here at the LKY School of Public Policy. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have with us here this book that you've just launched. It's a book called Disrupt, Filipina Women, Proud, Loud, and Leading Without a Doubt. And we just had a fantastic discussion just now with so many people who've similarly have been inspired with these stories. So thank you so much for bringing this book launch to us. And I would like to ask you perhaps the first thing, as I was reading the book, obviously, could you tell us how did this book came together and what is the significance of it for Filipino women in the diaspora or even back home?
Yes, thank you. So the book is really a compilation of personal essays by Filipina women leaders from around the world. Although many of them are in the United States, there are actually women in there who work in the Middle East, who lead companies, who are ambassadors and so on. So it's more global. And this came about through the work of the Filipina Women's Network, which is based in San Francisco. And at one of their 2 years ago at their Global Leadership Conference, they decided that it's time to let the voices of Filipino women leaders come out more. Because in many parts of the world, there is a stigmatization of Filipino women in the sense that we are often identified as domestic helpers, or you're identified as poor and voiceless, or you're a sex worker, and it's about time to redefine that. There was a controversy some years ago where it was rumored that the Oxford English Dictionary was considering putting in the meaning of the word Filipina as maid.
Right.
And so that caused a great outcry. So the point of this is really to bring the stories out. So the book itself, the stories in there depict women, whose challenges included poverty, for example, the lack of support sometimes from parents, or being challenged by other people and told that they could not succeed because they were not rich and well placed in the first place. There are some personal challenges. One of the women there has a son who was born blind. Another woman lost her husband very early. So there are personal tragedies as well that they've had to overcome. And some of the women, went abroad to try their luck really young. And that challenge is about knowing who you are and defining who you are at a fairly young age. And that's not always very easy for women to do. But the wonderful thing that comes out of these essays is how the women overcame these obstacles and really pushed ahead with their own goals, their values, and then giving back, believing in themselves, being resilient when tragedy struck, and finding new ways not only to cope but to do even better.
Could you probably tell us a little bit about what does it take to actually increase the women at the leadership level in public policy particularly? There's a lot of barriers in politics, as you know, in Asia. And I know, because as a woman who is at a leadership position, and your research is on that
Yes.
in Asia.
So I have not been a political or government appointee myself, but if you look at the numbers, those, for example, that are tracked by the Global Gender Gap Report that's published every year, political empowerment is an area where Asia is not the poorest. Some countries do fairly well, for example, and most of the countries that do well are countries with quota systems. And quotas, or affirmative action, it is a very controversial tool.
Yes.
It's controversial because people argue that that just encourages corruption, or you put into position women who are not really qualified. I am not convinced at all that these arguments carry water. My own belief is that affirmative action, whether it's the panchayats of India or other countries, or outside Asia, Norway, for example, that mandate a quota for women on corporate boards, I think that these kinds of measures are the quickest way to correct an imbalance that has been going on for centuries. The imbalance has been against women. So it's the fastest way. But with affirmative action or quotas, I think we need to make them also for a limited amount of time, not forever.
Right.
Because it's there to correct the imbalance in the fastest way possible, but that over time, meritocracy should be the important thing.
Right.
And so women in the past have had to, and today still have to overcome hurdles that male colleagues don't have to do. So that's why I believe that affirmative action could be a solution. Secondly, what we need to do is to bring men on board, because in countries, for example, where political parties are required to have women on the party list, they will put women in there just to tick a box,
Right.
but they do not actually give these women decision-making power or authority. So
That's-
they're just ticking a box. It's not good enough. So we need to get the men in and educate them more in what it is that women contribute. And there is research on what women contribute in the public sphere.
Yeah.
And then I would suggest for students of public policy, network early. Your generation should all be helping one another as your careers rise, even whether that's nationally in your individual countries, or let's say you start working for multilateral organizations.
Yeah.
Your network should be rich, and with social media, there's no excuse not to be in touch with each other and helping one another rise in the public policy sphere.
I think a lot of people share that sentiment for sure, yeah. And maybe returning back to the Philippines, we actually had a discussion just now, and the numbers of women at boards in Philippines was cited to be 24%. And there was, obviously it varies based on statistical analysis, but what can really countries learn from the experience of Philippines? And what do you think are the challenges inside Philippines itself, if there are any outstanding issues that should be addressed in terms of gender equality in Philippines?
Yeah, so I mentioned during the book launch today that the Philippines is actually among the top 10 best countries in the world for gender equality. So that's good news. Does that mean everything is perfect? Of course not. So your question is the right one. What else needs to be addressed? Those numbers of women on corporate boards in the Philippines, I think, are a little bit misleading. They're a little bit too high when they say 24% or 30%. Many of these boards are family boards, and so therefore it doesn't really say much about gender equality, because the women on these boards might be the children of the business owners or the relatives and so on. So I think you have to be careful with the numbers. I think the Global Gender Gap Report underlines that in Asia, it's no more than a maximum of 11% women on boards. However, we do well in putting women in senior management positions. We do better than the OECD countries, than the Western countries, and that's true. That's partly, again, a result of family relationships, because there are so many family-owned businesses. The good news there, though, is that even though it's family businesses, the good news is that in the past, when fathers were not willing to let their sons inherit, today that's changed. Fathers are willing to let daughters inherit businesses and let them run the business. So back to the Philippines, what else needs to change? We still have a macho culture in the Philippines that allows, for example, a lot of philandering, where men have multiple wives. I think that's wrong. We don't have divorce. I think that's a real problem. Second, for the longest time, birth control was totally stigmatized, frowned upon, and was even not supported by the government because of the influence of the Catholic Church. That has changed since a law has been passed that allows for birth control, and now we just need to make sure that women use birth control so that women don't have 7, 8, 9, 10 children. And then thirdly, I think the men need to work harder. I was very surprised recently to learn that the bank on whose board I sit in the Philippines has 69% female employees, and I'm asking, where are the men? And when you look at Filipino women working in Singapore or Hong Kong as domestic helpers, and you ask them, where are the men? They're back home drinking beer. So that's not a good thing. We need to bring the Filipino men back into the workforce, co-leading families with their wives, and sharing more, both the work outside of earning a livelihood and the work at home, taking care of the children.
So thank you for bringing up that idea of men leaning in, both at home and at the workplace. I think us as students at the Bridging Gap, we've also been trying very hard to push for more men to come lean in and come to our events. So what do you think is the significance of this movement, and an increasingly very slow movement of men leaning in to help drive gender equality?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, Desi. I think that the issue of men leaning in is something that is indispensable to gender equality. Because gender equality is not an issue for women alone. It's not an issue for one gender and not the other. After all, the reason that many women drop out, for example in Asia, out of the workforce, out of their careers, the main reason is really the pressure of family and the pressure to be more traditional. And these things will not change unless men lean in also. So the example I often give is in Japan, where for every 30 hours of work at home that a professional woman does. So she works in the office, she comes home and works another 30 hours a week. Her husband also works in the office but comes home and works only 3 hours. For the 30 hours the woman puts in, the husband only works 3 hours. That is unsustainable. At some point in time, should a woman choose to have a family, she will feel forced to choose between her family, home, and children, and her career and her leadership in the world. And that's a very tough choice to make. So when I talk to young people, I always say the most important decision you will make is who you marry. So the first rule, if you want to be a woman leader, is don't marry a jerk. Right. And I've come up with a definition for a jerk. A jerk is a man who believes the only dreams that matter are his dreams. Okay, so don't marry a jerk, because it is a question for the family. Both must lean in to support one another. And then government must actually support working families where both husbands and wives work, so that, you know, there is ample child care, for example, that's dependable and reliable and affordable. So this is a movement where you are totally right. Bridging Gap has got to get more men, students, and faculty and administrators leaning in on the issue of gender equality.
So this is a really timely discussion, as you know, this men leaning in both at home and in the workplace to try to fight or strive together for gender equality. And thank you so much for bringing that idea, because we also, as a group, when we were at Bridging Gap, we're trying very hard to get into all the men to come lean in to our events as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and hope the students read the book. Thank you.
Thank you.